base. And it is liable to lika, chechacha, and peah. And poor Israelites and poor priests may gather it, and the poor Israelites may sell theirs to the priest at the price of truma, and the money is theirs. Rav Tarfon says only poor priests should gather, for they may forget and put it in their mouths. Rav Akiva said to him, if so, let them only be ritually clean. I'm sorry, ritually gather. And it is
It only the richly pure gather.
gather. What did I say? Only the ritually poor, clean. Okay, sorry. And is liable to masters and master ani. And poor Israelites and poor priests may take, but the poor Israelites must sell theirs to the priest at the price of truma, and the money is theirs. He who smites is praiseworthy, and he who threatens, how shall he do it? He must hang baskets around the necks of the animals and put them in the same kind. Thus he neither muzzles the animal and gives it truma to eat. The product of truma is truma, and the product of the product is chulin. The product of table is Ma'aser Rishon, of spontaneous growth of the seventh year, of truma from outside Eretz Yisrael is meduma, and of first fruit is chulin. The product of hegdish or Ma'aser Sheni is chulin, and he redeems them at the time that they were sown. Okay.
Okay. Um, Mishna, hey, Maya Ligna Shel Truma v'Achas Shel Chulin. Okay, so basically, whatever your measure is, a ligna is that's it's actually like a square of in the field where you've planted your seeds. So there are 100 squares of truma and one of chulin. So just one of chulin. Just bear that in mind.
Right.
And you don't and one of, and they were planted. Seeds were planted in the ground, and they were and we've forgotten what they were. But there was one square of chulin among them, and we don't know where that square of chulin is. Kulan mutarin b'davar zaro kaleh. The most incredible heter here, because now we're saying that all of these are permitted.
Good.
Just because by virtue of one, normally bittul is like 1 in 100 of isser inside a majority of heter. Here you've got an incredible situation where you've got one square of heter among 100 of isser. Okay, and we're still saying that this is kind of a mutter. Again, why?
Right.
Because this already is a chumrah that Rabbanan imposed on somebody who went and planted truma seeds. Okay, and since minat Torah, it's okay. We're not going to take it to any further than that.
Right.
Okay. But this is only B'davash zara kale, only if the seed disintegrates like grains.
Yeah.
Okay. Aval b'davar she'ein zara kale, if you have something where it doesn't disintegrate, like onions, garlics, okay, where you plant that in the ground, and it's the same thing that grows and pushes shoots out. Okay, a bulb. Um, Afilu meya shel chulin va'achas shel truma. Even if you have your normal shear bittul of 1 against 100. So if you have one truma and 100 chulin, sorry,
Forget it.
there's
Right.
no there's no bittul over here. When it's attached to the ground, we don't have a shear bittul. It's still too chashuv to have a shear bittul, and kulan asurin. Every one of them. When you say asurin, means that every one of them has to be treated as potential truma.
Oh, right. You
Okay.
don't know
So
which
that
is right.
means, so your halacha is going to follow on from that perspective when you say that anything that you harvest from this field. Now, the reality is that there are 100 parts of chulin inside there, but it's kind of like a meduma situation where every one of them is potentially truma, and it's meduma just without a sheer bittul.
Right.
So
So you
he
don't.
would, so he'd have to harvest his field and sell it on to the price to the coin at the price of meduma. Okay. Next, ha tevel. What happens if somebody took untithed produce and
Right.
planted it? Right? You suppose um, this is only talking about in a situation where the tevel, because you're allowed to eat tevel in the field, right? If you're walking through the field and you just want to pluck something, that's you're only allowed to eat tevel. As soon as it becomes chayiv in Terumos and Mastras, you brought it into the house, or you picked it and Shabbos went over it or something. We've dealt with these cases. Okay, so now this tevel grain that you
Mhm.
wanted that now was supposed to be mastered. It got mixed up or he forgot what it was, and he went and planted it again in his field for the next crop. Gidulav mutarin bedavar shezaro kale. So once again, if the seed disintegrates, then we say no, no, it happened.
So,
Such is life. Aval bedavar she'ein zaro kale. If it does not disintegrate, if it's a bulb, gidulin aserin. Even the if you did this a couple times, it does not lose its shem table. Now, what does it mean that it's aser? What's going to grow out of this is going to be table and chayav in Terumos and Masros. So the only real difference is that you're going to arrive in um, uh, is that you're going to arrive in the field and start picking things, and you're going to say, "Oh, I'm used to eating things as I'm picking in the field," and you're going to say, "No, no, no, no. From right now, if you want to eat this, you have to take Terumos and Masters off it. That's all. It's just table. Table's an easy
right.
thing to deal with." Okay. Gidulin Aserin. But if you kept doing this, it remains in that status of table, even if you planted and if you took it out and replanted and took it out and replanted it 100 times, it's
Got it.
still going to remain in its status. Ezehu davar she'ein zaro kaleh. So now, finally, having said this a few times, in the general sense, the Mishnah says, okay, let's see some examples. What is something that does not disintegrate in the ground, like luf, and luf is like, I guess, leaks, is it? How do they translate it?
No, they don't have look. They don't have
They
leafy.
just call it luf.
They have arum.
It's a, it's a
ARUM.
kind of it's a kind of onion. There says
Kind of
Kahanchi.
onion. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's kind of onion.
Shum, Betzalim, and garlic and onions. Rabbi Yehuda Omer Hashum Kesorim. He says, "No, I don't hold that with garlic. Garlic disintegrates enough in the ground that I hold it. It's like a davar. It says Shizara Kale. Halacha does not follow Rabbi Yehuda in this case." Okay. Mishnah Zayin, Hamenakesh im Hanochri bechasios. Now, what's the situation over here is that you've got a non-Jew who owns a field in Eretz Yisrael. Now, this is a Stam Mishnah according to Rabbi Meir. Rabbi Meir is the guy who doesn't hold by Heter Mechira. You can just remember that as your rule of thumb. Rabbi Meir doesn't hold by Heter Mechira. Okay, which means that if a guy owns land in Eretz Yisrael, it's chayiv in Terumos and Masros. He just doesn't know it, and he's
Right.
not going to do it. Okay, so now the chassidus is this is like it's a kind of an onion, like a spring onion. Okay, well, sure. In other words, it's something in the category of davar she'ein zaro kaleh, which means that all of the previous things that we've been saying about the fact that it's tevel is the most important. He didn't take Terumos and Masros mistama because he's not Jewish and that's not what he does.
Right.
And the seed that he's putting back in, therefore, is naturally going to be tevel. So now you've got a Jew who's been employed by this non-Jew to work in his field. And as a Jew, the halacha of the worker is that if he's working in the produce, he's allowed to eat from it. So now we just said that tevel you can't eat from without taking Terumos and Masros once it's been growing again. And then we're talking about davar she'en zaro kaleh. Okay, so we've got a contradiction. He should be allowed to eat, but he's not allowed to eat because he has to take Terumos and Masros. Okay, so now, afal pisha peros av tevel, even though the produce is technically tevel, ochel mehem arai. He has a heter to do this. Yeah, to eat from it arai, because the fact that in the previous Mishnah we said that even gidulav is considered tevel for people in the field. Nonetheless, that's a knas midrabanan. The Rabbanan aren't going to make that on a non-Jew's produce because he's not even chayiv in mitzvahs. So why are you going to put a knas on his produce? So the Jew who's working in his field doesn't have to worry about it. Now, this is again all in the world according to Rabbi Meir. According to everyone else, they say that the Heter Mechira works, and if a non-Jew owns a field, his produce is completely pater from Trumas and Masras. Okay. Shtile Truma Shinitma'u. Now, here's okay, normally we're talking about a stil, we're talking about a tree, but in this particular case, we're talking about an edible product that can be put back in the field. So Kahati uses the example of cabbages, where you could pick them and put them back in the ground and they'll carry on growing. Okay, so you pick them out with the roots, and okay, so here's our story. He picked the cabbage, took it out the ground, it got wet, and then a Tame person touched it. And he said, this is, I wanted to have this with my truma produce. So I wanted to, for some reason, I wanted to make sure that this cabbage was going to stay tahor. So he's a chacham. What does he do? He takes his cabbage and puts it back into the ground. And once it's attached to the ground, it loses its tumah, right? Well, says the Mishnah, not entirely. Um, so the case is Shtile Chumash and Nismo became Tame, Shtala, and he planted them back in the ground. Taharu Mila Tame, it cannot transmit Tuma anymore. So now, even though it is Tame itself, it cannot transmit Tuma to anything else. But if you picked it, the leaves are going to actually remain in their original Tuma. So what did the Mishnah say? Asurin milechol ad sheyagomis ochel. You cannot eat them with say truma, um, until he cuts off the parts that became tummy and or the edible parts, because if it's all attached, then as soon as I mean, we learned this in Uktzin, if it's part of the thing, then it's a chibur. So even if the tame person touches one leaf, then the whole thing is going to become tame.
Okay.
Okay, so
How
then
does you replant? Though, if you cut out the cabbage, how do you replant it?
yeah.
You just
So you can put down the base, which has got all the roots and things, and cut off all the edible leaves and let it grow some more.
Mhm.
Okay. So if that's what you really want to do, you want to make sure that your cabbage doesn't becomes purified. You have to cut off all the edible stuff and replant it, which you haven't really gained anything,
Right,
have you?
right.
Okay. Um, but nonetheless, that's what the Chachamim was saying is this shtick is not going to work unless you're going to go to this extreme, and maybe you'll have
Right.
another product. Let's just not talk about cabbage. Let's find I don't know what other example we could have, but let's say there was only a small amount of edible stuff, and there's a lot of like a lot of woody stem or something like that grows off the fruit. Um, let, let, let's say yeah, I can't think of a practical example, but if there was only a small amount of edible stuff at the time
Right.
when it became tame, you cut off the edible stuff and replant it, then whatever grows out is going to be fine. Rabbi Yehuda Omer Achi Yagom V'Yishne. Rabbi Yehuda's machmir over here. He was makel on the previous Mishnah. He's machmir in this Mishnah and says that you have to, if you're going to do this and you want to make sure nothing becomes tame, you have to repeat the exercise twice. Um, and
No, no one's going to do that.
he's going to do that. Yeah. Okay. So
Okay.
that's
Okay.
that. Let's go back to
Okay.
Vav Vav.
Well, Reb Eliezer says one may pay with one kind for another, provided he pays from the superior for the inferior kind. But Reb Akiva says one may pay only with the same kind. Therefore, if he ate cucumbers of the sixth year, he must wait for the cucumbers of the eighth year and pay with them. From the same source that Rebbe Eliezer derives his leading ruling, Rebbe Akiva derives the stringent ruling, as is written, and he shall give the holy thing to the priest, anything that may become holy. So says Rebbe Eliezer. But Rebbe Akiva says, and he shall give the holy thing to the priest, the holy thing that he ate. If one eats a truma willfully, he must repay its value, but does not pay the fifth. The repayment is kulin, and if the priest wants to forego, he may forego. And if a priest's daughter married a non-priest and afterwards ate truma, she pays its value, but does not pay the fifth, and her death is by burning. If she was married to any one of those eligible, she must repay its value plus the fifth, and her death is by strangling. So says Rav Meir, but the Kachamim say both repay its value, but do not repay the fifth, and the death is by burning. Okay.
Okay.
We're on to this. Okay, here we go. Shavias. Okay. Vova.
Of hey.
One may not, but
Of
of
hey.
hay.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry, you're right. Right. One may not take out of the oil that must be burnt in 70 of produce from Eretz Yisrael beyond Eretz Yisrael. Reb Shimon said, and I heard especially that one may take them to Syria, but not beyond from Eretz Yisrael. One may not bring in truma from beyond Eretz Yisrael into Eretz Yisrael. Reb Shimon says, I heard expressly that one may bring in from Syria, but one may not bring from beyond Eretz Yisrael. And they laid down an important principle regarding the seventh year. Whatever is human food or cattle food or a species of dying matter which does not keep in the ground, the seventh year applies to it and its proceeds. Beer applies to it and its proceeds. And which are they? The leaves of the wild loaf and leaves of mint, hickory, leeks, portulac, and meat with milkweed. And cattle food, thorns and thistles. But and of the species of dying matter, aftergrowth of woad and matter, the seventh year applies to them and their proceeds, and beer applies to them and to their proceeds.
Okay.
Okay. And,
Brachas. Iron.
it's very interesting that as we go through this, is the third year we're doing this. A lot of the checks that I have when I'm going to go to the next page, where I put a check next to it. A lot of
Yeah.
the checks are exactly the same place where we were before. It's very interesting. So, all right, brachas.
But when you say
Um,
when you put checks, what do you mean? Is in terms
I
of
have a little check next to it. So I know that if there were two on a page, I want to make sure I get the right one. So I have a check
oh,
next
no,
to it.
our cycle is shifting out by one every time.
So I now have two checks. If it said nothing there, if there was two, I put three. So I would know.
We'll only be back in sync with the original one once we've completed three cycles.
They served him with the savory to begin with bread and bread with it. He recites the appropriate blessing over the savory and exempts the bread, since the bread is now secondary. This is the rule. Wherever there is a staple food accompanied by a subsidiary item, he recites the blessing over the staple and exempts the subsidiary. Mhm. That's an Ikel and Tuffle. That's what this all is about
Yeah,
over here.
exactly. Ikar and Tafel.
If he ate figs, grapes, or pomegranates, he recites thereafter three blessings. So says Rav Gamaliel. The sages say one blessing, the substance of the three. Rabbi Kiva says even if he ate boiled vegetables only for his meal, he recites thereafter three blessings. If he drank water to quench his thirst, he should say, through whose word all things exist. And Rav Tarfon says, who creates many things. Three who have eaten together are required to invite. If one deny and the first tithe from which the have offering had been separated, the second tithe or food offering belonged to the sanctuary that has been redeemed, and the waiter who has eaten with an olive size of food and a kuthian may all be included for the invitation. But one who ate tebel in the first tithe from which truma had not been set aside, and the second tithe and consecrated fruits which had not been redeemed, and the waiter who ate less than an olive size of food, and the Gentile, all are not to be included in the invitation. Okay.
Okay.
And Olios. Okay, Yud Aleph Bet. If a portico is split and truma is on one side, utensils on the other side remain tahor. If a person places his foot or a reed on top of the split, he or it combines the truma. If a person places a reed on the ground, it does not cause truma to spread unless it is a handbreadth above the ground. A thick garment and a thick beam only spread truma when they are a handbreadth above the ground. If two garments are folded one on top of the other, only I'm sorry, if two garments are folded one on top of the other, tuma is only spreads when the upper one is at least a handbreadth above the ground. And if a person is lying there, Beit Shammai says he does not spread tuma, whereas Beit Hillel says the person is hollow and the part of his body that is above spreads tuma. If someone was looking down from a window and formed an ohel over a corpse bearers, Beit Shammai says he does not spread tuma, whereas Beit Hillel says he does spread tuma. They agree that if he dressed or two people are on top of the other, they spread tuma.
Yeah.
Okay. And Odazar. Okay, Aleph Gimel. There are idolatrous festivals, Calendar and Saturnalia and Caratius, and the coronation day of emperors, and the birthday and the anniversary of his death. These are the words of Rav Meir. But it could come and say, any death for which there is a burning, there is idolatry. For which there is no burning, there is no idolatry. However, on the day of the shaving of his beard or lock of hair, or the day that he returned from the sea, On the day that he was released from prison, or when an idolater made a banquet for his son, the prohibitions apply only on that day and with regard to that man alone. If a city has an idolatrous service in it, it is permitted to transact business outside the city. If there was an idolatrous service outside, it is permitted to transact business inside it. What is the law regarding going there? When the road leads solely to that place, it is forbidden. But if one can travel on it to another place, it is permitted. A city which has in it an idolatrous service, and there were shops in it that were decorated, and those that were not decorated, this was once an incident and made shame. But the sages say the decorated ones are prohibited, and the undecorated ones are permitted. These are the things it is forbidden to sell to idolaters. It's for Tobolin and white figs on their stalks, and frankincense and a white cock. Right? Judas says that it's permitted to sell him a white cock, among others. When it is by itself, we may clip its toe and sell it to him, for they do not sacrifice anything defective to an idol. All other things, if their purpose is unspecified, it is permitted to sell them, but if their purpose is specified, it is forbidden to sell them. Rameir says even fine dates, that means date palm and kotziv and niklivim, are forbidden to sell for one to sell to idolaters. Okay.
Aye.
Last, we have
Aye.
kagiga. Okay, a gimel aleph. The stringency of kodesh compared to truma is as follows. We may immerse vessels within another vessel for truma, but not for kodesh. The bottom, the inside, and the handle are considered separate vessels as regards truma, but not as regards kodesh. Someone carrying a midrash may simultaneously carry truma, but not kodesh. The garments of those who eat truma have midrash contamination for those who eat kodesh, for those who eat kodesh. Unlike the rule of kodesh is the rule of truma. Where in the case of immersing garments to be worn while handling, kodesh must tie the knots dry, immerse and then retie them, but in the case of truma, one-way tie and then immerse. Vessels that were completed in a state of tahara required immersion for use only with kodesh, but not for use with truma. And a vessel combines whatever is in it with regard to kodesh, but not with regard to truma. The fourth degree of contamination in the case of kodesh is invalid, but only a third degree is invalid in the case of truma. And in the case of truma, if one of a person's hands become contaminated, the other one is still pure. But in the case of kodesh, he must immerse both of them. For one hand contaminates the other as regards kodesh, but not as regards truma. We may eat dry food with contaminated hands if the foods are truma, but not if they are kodesh. The Onan and the one who needs to bring an atonement offering require immersion for eating kodesh, but not for eating truma. Okay.
Okay, and we's done.
We realize I realized that at least